I've seen before. So glad to meet all of you I haven't seen before. And so glad to be in this building again. Can I share a little bit of story from a guy who's been a working reporter for 58 years in this city? The last time I was in this building was on April 5th, 1968. Anybody scratching memory? Yeah. The night before, Martin Luther King had been murdered in Memphis, Tennessee. I was a young reporter for the Washington Post. I was at a performance of Pajama Game at the National Theater. And it was intermission, and the word about King's assassination spread through the crowd. And if any of you can tell me what happens in the second act of the Pajama Game, please do, because I never saw it. I went running back from the National Theater to the Post, which was then at 1515 L Street Northwest for all you old timers. And I was on the street without food, sleep, anything for the next 2 days. About 36 hours in to that reporting assignment, which remains the most incredible 4 days I've ever spent as a reporter, with smoke everywhere, fires everywhere, gunshots everywhere, people looting right in front of police without the slightest compunction. I watched it all. And then one of my fellow reporters said, "Hey, you know what? The Red Cross has set up a station in some place up on near Wisconsin Avenue and Calvert Street in some little community center, and they're serving coffee and they're serving donuts, and they got bathrooms." Well, that was a knockout combination of 1, 2, 3. And I came up those steps and I walked into this room where there were indeed coffee and donuts, and right out in the hall then and now was a bathroom. So thank you, Guy Mason Community Center. I don't think I would have made it through those 4 days without this place and that help. It's my pleasure to talk to you today about how the media are handling public affairs and public people, the people we elect. And the answer is badly. I think I have now just uttered the Olympic and world record for the shortest speech ever delivered to the Glover Park Village. But no, not Bob. He's going to go on for another 40 minutes anyway. Why badly? That's what we're going to talk about today, ladies and gentlemen, because my own experience in all of the media, and I've had tremendous long experience, 58 years of working for the Washington Post. I still work there on special assignments. I do advance obituaries about famous people. What a kick that is, you know? If you're interested in that, we'll talk more about that during the question period. But I spent 25 years in radio, like my friend Nick in the back there. I worked for 9 radio stations and also for dessert for 7 television stations. And what that proves mostly is a couple of things: that I have a great appetite for work, and B, I was congenitally poor. So I needed to work as much as possible. Jane's in the other room manning the book sale, and I'll tell you more about that in a little while. But what that gave me was a real sense of Washington in every way. So many people believe, and so many of my colleagues at the Washington Post always believed, and still do believe, that there's exactly one story in this city. And that story resides in the suit and the white shirt and the long red tie of the President of the United States. Here's what I decided. I've been at the Post for only a very short time, and I was assigned by the legend himself, Ben Bradley, to cover the White House. This was in the late days of the Lyndon Johnson administration. And I went down there and I was covering the White House, and it was the biggest bore in the history of the world. Journalists thrive on access. If you are covering the White House then and now, you are penned up in this press room that's in the East Wing. Twice a day they have briefings where they say, it's like being a baby robin. You know, they say, open wide, here's a worm for you, here's another worm. You can't interview anybody, you can't walk around, you can't do anything. So after a few months, the best thing about that gig, maybe the only good thing about that gig, was that I found a friend in a sound man for CBS TV. And he had this big equipment trunk. And we used to play gin rummy all day long for stakes. And I beat this guy's rear end time and again at gin rummy. And I made a lot of money from this gig, but that's about all I made. So finally I went to Bradley and I said, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this job. There's this whole city out here that nobody pays much attention to, that really isn't covered very much by the Post, even though at that point the Post had made its bones on local coverage for the most part. I said, that's what I want to do. And Bradley, bless his heart, looked at me and he said, and I'm going to clean up his language a good deal here, he said, you know, kid, there's only one story in this town, and it's called the President of the United States. And I said, sir, there are other stories out here. And what my career has taught me is that there's a whole range of stuff in the Washington area, more all the time, and certainly more in our lifetime, when the Washington area has grown and diversified like never before in its history. It continues to do this. But the media are now at a moment where the media have got to decide what they stand for, what they will cover, how quickly they will cover it, how thoroughly they will cover it, and how fast they will cover it. And I want to stress the word fast to you, ladies and gentlemen, because the biggest change in the media over the last 25 years has been speed. All the years that I worked for the Washington Post, we had one moment. We had one newspaper once a day. Today, as you know, and as if you don't know it, your children and grandchildren certainly know it, there's a deadline every second. News breaks every second. It always did. But if you're publishing a newspaper only once a day, if you're on an all-news radio station which thinks that 90% of its listeners will listen only in the morning, well, that's one deadline, not many. If you're in the local television industry and people say, oh, well, yeah, we have these things called the 6 o'clock news, where you can watch the news once a day. This is long before local news on television metastasized. Gosh, help me here. I don't get up this early, but I think there's now a 4 a.m. newscast on television, isn't there? There's a 5 a.m., there's a noon, or there used to be. There's a 5 p.m., there's a 6 p.m., there's a 7 p.m. These news shows have discovered that there's an unending appetite for news. But I forgot 11. How could I forget news at 11? Film at 11. There's so much airtime devoted to this, and so little news devoted in that airtime, that really we're no better off than we ever were, even though we see more news shows than we ever had. What has happened? The internet happened, as all of you know. The internet absolutely has kneecapped the Washington Post and all heritage newspapers. The internet, right here in Montgomery County, Maryland, is single-handedly responsible for killing off 4 pretty successful local newspapers, the Sentinel and all of its children. The internet has utterly reshaped how people seek news, how they consume it, and how the dollars work. And I want to be sure all of you understand, it always was about dollars in a way, except it wasn't. And I'm going to trot out the name of my sainted former boss, Katharine Graham, who in all of the hundreds of years that the Washington Post has published, I think is clearly the most important person who ever worked there. Because yes, it was about dollars, and yes, she would go around saying, you guys can have all the great journalism you want, and all the fun you want, and you can write about Watergate all you want, and you can write about everything under the sun all you want, but it's got to work as a business. Now, Katharine Graham was lucky, I was lucky to serve under her and be alive at that time. As the Washington area grew, the Post grew with it. And as the Washington area grew, really beginning right after World War II, as the federal government surged, as the stable permanent population here surged, as all of you who were children here then or young adults here can remember, it used to be just the district. It used to be not much out there. I told this story the other day, I'll tell it again, but one of my earliest assignments at the Washington Post in 1967, they sent me out to a place called Annandale, Virginia. Yeah. I didn't need a passport, but I might as well have needed one because this road out there, this circumferential road called the Beltway, had been open only about 5 years or so, and you could actually drive on the Beltway without smashing into hundreds of your fellow citizens. And they sent me out to Annandale to the interchange with a street called Little River Turnpike. 236, you've been there. 1967, were you there?
I lived in Fairfax in that
You
year.
did, okay. I went out there and my assignment was find somebody at Little River Turnpike in the Beltway to talk to. There wasn't anything there. You know how the cloverleaf looks, and now if you go out there, Jane and I were just out there the other day, there are motels and apartment buildings and strip shopping centers and God knows what. It's all built up. I walked around trying to find somebody to talk to for most of the afternoon. It was like being in Idaho or something, right? Today, you tell that to a kid, they don't believe you. And why should they believe you? But today, the kids say to us of a certain age, oh, where do I get my news? I get my news on my phone. And the problem with that, ladies and gentlemen, is that they don't go one layer deeper. They don't say, where does that content, strike me dead. I swore I would never use that word. I just did. We're friends, okay? That content didn't just walk into the phone. It got there through a whole variety of forces that I want to be sure you understand. One is the decimation of local news. Decimation. Again, Montgomery County, Maryland. 1.1 million people, half again as big as the District of Columbia. A golden place for news. Not only does news happen there, but people in Montgomery County are the almost perfect audience for anything you want to do. Check this one out. 30% of the adults who live in Montgomery County have an advanced degree. That is one of the highest such percentages in the world. These are people who know the news, care about the news, go to dinner parties and bore the daylights out of everybody about what's hot that day on page 1. Yes, they still talk about page 1. Until a week ago, Montgomery County had no dedicated local news source. When an all-digital newspaper just started up there, I wish them the very best. But in the 25 years that I'm talking about here, from 2000 until 2025, when the internet grabbed onto the news business, shook it, and said, you guys are never going to believe this, but it's changing forever. 2000, the Washington Post had 11 reporters in Montgomery County. Today it has 1. Way back when, in 2000, the average size of the Metro section in the Washington Post was 9 pages. This morning, 3, as long as you count the house ads and all the rest of that junk there. What are those ads that are in there every day for blinds or home repair or something? It ain't the same. But what is really not the same is the way we live and how this is a reflection of the way we live. We live so much faster now than we ever did. We live at a speed that argues against deep, great journalism because that takes time. Okay, a lot of you have told me today, and I'm sure the rest of you, still really care about the world, and you're really willing to devote time and energy and to some extent money into learning about the world. Well, if you pick up the Washington Post this morning, any morning, and you want to bring the world to you, you understand that that's going to take some time. If you want to read about what happened at the White House yesterday with Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, you can't learn that in 140 characters. And you certainly cannot learn that in a tweet or an X or whatever it's called that some dopey friend sent you overnight. Hey, check this out, man. Hey, take a look at this. This is all the news. Does anybody in this room really think you can understand the Middle East in a tweet? Does anybody in this room really think that complicated stories can be boiled down to their essence so that poor little you who doesn't understand anything and doesn't really care enough to understand anything, poor little you is just going to going through your life and blah, 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 and all your relationships and your jobs. It's a different world, and speed has made it a different world. But so too have the economics of the newspaper and the journalism business. Back when I was still at the Post, and yes, I've got to admit this, I've been gone for more than 21 years. Wow, I don't even believe that myself, but yeah, 21 years. If you wonder where to catch my pearls of wisdom now, I'm sure you're all dying to know this. The week after I left the Washington Post, the editor and publisher of the Beacon newspapers, aimed at a senior audience, called me. I never met this guy. And he said, how'd you like to do a monthly column for us? And I said, okay, what do you got in mind? The guy said, you can write anything you want as long as it's about old people. And I said, yeah, well, okay, I'm getting older every day, so I guess I'm qualified to do this. I've been doing that for 21 years, once a month. I just wrote my next one this morning before I came to see you. So, you know, what do old columnists do? They keep writing columns. No news there, I guess. I want you to understand how money works in today's journalism and how it drives so much of what you do and don't see. Every time you go on your computer and, let's say, pull up WashingtonPost.com, your progress is measured. It's noted, it's knowable, it's known. How many minutes you spend on a certain story on WashingtonPost.com, knowable. How many stories you read in each visit to the website, knowable. How many minutes you spend on an ad, knowable. And how many times you come back to a certain story, knowable. Let me give you a perfect example of how insane this world is. Because clicks drive the world, and clicks drive the dollars. And it's no longer a passive kind of business where some editor at the Washington Post with his sleeves rolled up says, well, you know, I think this might be a real good headline on this story. And he plops a headline on top of the story, and that's the headline. What happens now, ladies and gentlemen, is a story or a column will be posted on WashingtonPost.com with a headline. And if it does not attract a certain number of clicks right away, within 10 minutes, a figurative alarm bell will go off, and the editor will put up a different head to see if he can attract bigger fish and more fish. This happens around the clock every single day. David Ignatius, the great foreign affairs columnist for the Washington Post, wrote a column the other day about Putin and about Ukraine and about what's really going on there and about Trump's role in all of this. The first headline said, "Is Trump finished?" That's all it said. Well, you bet that attracted eyeballs. You bet that everybody out there who's been rooting for death by cheeseburger of the President of the United States said, oh my God, did David Ignatius just say that he's finished? Oh my God. The column said that Trump is finished talking to Putin. Trump is finished trying to get in the middle of this negotiation. The headline was borderline dishonest. Maybe over the borderline. Did that stop them from keeping that headline out there forever and ever, amen, because it was attracting clicks? No, it did not. That headline, excuse me, as we used to say in the newspaper business, ran all night. Nobody changed it. Everybody in this room is part of an economic ecosphere. Everybody in this room has to deal with this world of clicks and dollars and people following your behavior to the nth degree. But there's nobody who has bent more into the wind on all of this than public officials. And that's what I want to talk for a few minutes about today. Excuse me, so you can understand where all of this is going. Once upon a time, public officials were covered because they were public officials. Parties were covered because they had positions on issues. And trends in the political world were identified only when the evidence was really clear. For example, was there really a groundswell around civil rights legislation in the 1960s before actual votes were taken? Yes, there was. Was there actually a groundswell against the end of the war in Vietnam in the 1970s before it actually happened? Yes, there was. But now what happens is, because of the internet, because of clicks, and because of our tremendous need to be entertained, public officials are pandering to the way media cover them and the way media are going to cover them. If you make a whole bunch of noise, you're going to get covered. If you stand there and you're as dull as can be in a gray suit and you say, well, you know, we really need to study the effects of the subsidy of the Affordable Care Act, you're not going to get covered. Because you won't produce clicks, you won't produce excitement, and you won't produce entertainment. The whole process is upside down. The whole political process is upside down. It's not only about entertainment, it is about personalization. Here we sit in the later part of 2025, and yes, I studied the calendar the other day, and we're not going to elect the next president of the United States for 3 years and 1 month. Take my word for it. Do you know what led the New York Post this morning? The New York Post, which is a 200-year-old famous newspaper in New York City, it's my guilty pleasure, by the way. I love the New York Post. Whenever I get on Amtrak to go to New York or come back, I buy it. The headlines in the New York Post are worth anything you pay. When 2 days ago, 1 day ago, the New York Mets did not qualify for the postseason in baseball. And this, of course, is the end of the world in New York City. And if it's the end of the world in New York City, you know that the New York Post is all over it. So the headline on the front page, in a world where there are two huge wars, where there's enormous political ferment, where there's generation trouble, where the people can't feed themselves. The headline on the front of the Post was, "Bums." B-U-M-S, exclamation point, and there you have it. Is that not proof of what I'm talking about? If you think that Trump's promise of a few days ago to Zelensky that he thinks that Ukraine could get back to its original borders was ever going to be all over the front page of the New York Post, it's the perfect example of litmus-tested, shock value, entertainment, fun, personalization. It's where we are in journalism. How very interesting that the New York Post is still alive in a newspaper town that gave the name to newspapers. When I was a little boy in the Bronx, yes, I know it's hard to imagine me as a little boy, there were 8 daily newspapers in New York City, 8 of them. Today there are sort of 3. The Times, the Daily News, kind of, and the Post, whenever the New York Mets failed to make the postseason. Not true. The Post is all over everything. It's dangerous. It's where we are, and it has colored our politics to the point where we are falling victim in the newspaper and the journalism business to the easiest kinds of stories that inform you the least. And I'm going to interrupt this program to venture into the part of the journalism world that I hate the most, and that is political polls. Anybody with me on this? I just hate political polls because so many reporters treat them as the gospel. So many reporters don't bother to take a look at the poll itself, who asked it, when it was asked, how it was asked, what words were used, who paid for the poll. Don't you think you're going to genuflect at the feet of whoever commissioned the poll? If you're a particular candidate, don't you want a particular result? And yet, the mainstream media, such as they are, defaults all the time to, oh my God, he's up in the polls. Oh my God, he's down in the polls. Oh my God, oh my God. And 3 years and 1 month before the next presidential election, none other than USA Today, 3 days ago, published the results of a poll. A straw poll based on, get this, 160 people. This is in a country of more than 340 million. 160 people. Who would be your first choice for the Democratic nominee in 2028? All right, we'll leave aside how insane it is to think about 2028 already, although, because of this ecosphere that we're talking about, I can promise you that at least 5 candidates today are raising money, hiring staff, and planning to run. It's going to be many more. Whether you believe this or not, and Donald Trump may not, he's going to be gone after this term. So there'll be an open seat, a huge possible change in the White House, maybe other changes. Lots of people are going to be running for this. But do you believe that it's responsible journalism? Is it responsible in any way to suggest that a poll of 160 people, 37 months out, tells you anything about anything? And this happens even when we get closer to the elections themselves. This happened in 2024. How the polls are worded never shows up in the journalism about the polls. So, you can have a poll question like this. It's loaded. Do you truly believe that Donald Trump captured the truth about the coronavirus in his first term in the White House? That's how some poll questions read. That is a dagger aimed at Trump, so the results will be skewed. They have to be. And maybe the pollsters want them to be. Be suspicious of this. but don't be surprised by this. You as news consumers, you're the people who matter here. You're the people who can push back on this by saying, that's not good enough. I want every piece of political journalism to have a box at the end of it that says how many people were polled, when they were polled, who paid for it, what the language was, and by the way, what the track record of this pollster has been over time. Wouldn't that help you a whole lot? Now, why do you think they don't do this? I'll tell you why they don't do this. Because USA Today got a whole mess of clicks the other day when they published the results of this poll, 160 people sampled, and look at this. Oh my gosh! Kamala Harris finished third! Oh my gosh! In the same month that she published her book. Oh my gosh! This must be a huge political trend. Oh my God. Really? Really? And even if you in this room, folks, are smart enough to know that that isn't accurate, it's not the kind of journalism you crave and depend on, even then, it's really hard to push back on this because clicks are so dominant and clicks are so massageable, as we saw with the David Ignatius headline, and clicks can be corrupt in a way that affects politics, it affects candidates, and it will for as far as the eye can see. I don't know if any of you are really good at technology, are you? I am really bad at technology, really bad. They make me carry this phone around. I have no idea how it works. I don't want to know how it works. I am the only person you will ever meet, living or dead, who has never taken a picture with his phone. I don't know how, nor do I understand what would happen if I ever did. How does the picture get out of your phone into somewhere? I don't know. It's just all too much. Can I have a brownie Hawkeye with a flash attachment? I mean, that I could deal with. Okay. Your kids and grandkids can tell you about this, but it's possible to set your phone with a system of alerts. My son showed me this. It's scary. Let's say you're crazy for Kim Kardashian, okay? Let's just say. You can set your phone to alert you anytime there's a story, let's say in the Washington Post, that mentions her name. Every single time. So let's say we were doing a story about my meeting with you today, okay? Let's say we wrote a lead that said, Bob Levey spoke to Glover Park Village on Tuesday, September 30th, comma, and Kim Kardashian was not there. And let's say I was an unethical, unscrupulous reporter who decided to write that, and somehow it got past 11 million editors and it got up online. Look at what would happen. First, lots of clicks would happen. Second, it would go electronically and automatically into my year-end review file, which would take a look at all the stories I've done in the last year and how many clicks they attracted. And then it would apportion merit raises, promotions, other recognition, all based on cheating and lying. Isn't that just what you want from your morning news grid? Just what you want. So how do we change this? Well, we can change this, I think, by a groundswell on your side. It is not too late for people on your side of the fence. And remember, journalism is a transaction. It's always a transaction. So many people think that they're helpless. They're just victims. You know, they stand there and journalism is rained down on them from 30,000 feet from an aircraft. That's not it at all. You choose journalism, or you don't. Journalism is a cooperative adventure. Journalism depends on readers and listeners and viewers. It always has. It always will. You have the power here. And if you don't buy into or even guilty pleasure, click on a little story about Kamala Harris finishing third in a silly little poll. If you don't do that, that's your vote in a way against that kind of journalism. And I hope you will cast it. And I will tell you this, there is some hope out there for the kind of journalism that I knew and loved, that you know and love. Here are the factors that are arraying themselves in the journalism world. First, politicians hate this. They would much rather talk about issues that matter, and they would much rather talk to people who understand issues, because the people understand journalism that covers those issues. So, here are the factors that I like. There are more educated people in the United States than ever before. 2, there are more people who are so tired of this idea that a headline on their phone can give them full understanding of anything, that they're beginning to look for deeper and better journalism. 3rd, they are voting with their dollars. There is nothing that forces loyalty anymore. There's no real rhythm or continuity. People can subscribe or not subscribe. They can subscribe and unsubscribe. My gosh, the Washington Post in the last 10 years has been a roller coaster. The Digital Post, when Donald Trump was elected the first time, had about 2 million subscribers. Right away, that number climbed to 6 million because people treated it, Nick, here we go, they treated it like all news radio. They had to keep checking back 40 times a day to see what the guy just said. 6 million. And it rode along pretty much at 6 million until near the end of his first term, even during the craziness of the early part of the pandemic. And the geniuses downtown at the Post said, oh, well, if we ever got 6 million, we'll always get 6 million. That's just given, they said. Well, it's not given in today's universe where you can bail in 1 second. You can just click 2 things and you're not a subscriber. That's exactly what happened. Biden got elected, 6 million became 2.5 million, just like that. And it rode along about like that for a while. Oh, Trump got reelected, 6 million again. But now even that is trickling down again. So it's not like the old days. It's certainly not like the Post that I joined and walked up with, which would increase its circulation by 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. It's just amazingly different now, and I want to give you a couple of statistics about that. Even though the Post is now primarily a national political newspaper, that's most of what's there now every day. 1993, not really all that long ago, okay? 930,000 daily copies of the Post. That was the circulation, 1993. More than 1.1 million on Sunday. That was a pretty successful newspaper in what was then and still is the 6th largest market in the country, not the 3rd or the 2nd. This is 6. You know what those numbers look like today? You don't want to know. 90,000 daily, less than 10% of the high water mark. That's the income paper. And the Sunday circulation is down below 400,000. Those numbers aren't coming back. And I wish I could be optimistic to you, ladies and gentlemen, about the political coverage in the Post, the depth of it, and particularly what you can hope to find in the future ink on paper. The ink on paper Post is going away. It's going away. If it had to stand on its own today as a business, it can't. It wouldn't. It hasn't. When I was bought out from the Post 21 years ago in the first wave of buyouts, there have now been 8, it was obvious that the Post really had no idea what to do about this thing called the internet, and it was circling the drain. I was born at the right time. I have gone on to many things in those 21 years. I'm sorry in a way, but I'm not sorry in a way. I would not be at the Post today because it has so de-emphasized local coverage. It has so de-emphasized the kind of political coverage that I like and did and depend on, that it's not the same place. Okay, what can you do? You can insist on the best, you can vote with your dollars, and you can vote along with educated people to get where you want to get. Now, before I take your questions, and I'm going to do that in just a minute, as we say in the radio business, we interrupt this program for a brief commercial announcement. Yes, I brought along books to sell, and they're in the back room there, and my wife Jane is back there. She will manage the sale of my novel, Larry Felder Candidate. With her is our dear friend Gita Yusuf, I do these kinds of presentations a lot. I got, I think, 6 of them coming up in November and December. Jane isn't going to be able to do them because Jane's having her shoulder replaced in a couple of weeks. And, you know, I could sell tickets for this one. Guess who Nurse Cratchit's going to be? Guess. For a whole month, helping Jane with her sling, you know, washing her hair. Oh my God, this is going to be the worst. The actual worst was the first shoulder she had done a year and a half ago when I tried to play myself out of the lineup. Uh-oh.
Are you Jane?
That's Jane. How did you know? How did you guess? Anyway, I can open a can of soup. That's about the size of it. So Jane had better be ready for that. The book wraps itself around everything we've been talking about today. 20th century journalism, the good, some of the ugly, and also politics in the Washington area, in particular candidates. And the story of the book is pretty simple. Larry Felder is a famous Washington newspaper columnist who abandons journalism to run for Congress right out here in Montgomery County, Maryland. And I'm not going to give it away too much, but poor Larry. Love happens to him, corruption happens, the unexpected happens, and he particularly runs afoul of a young female reporter, the kind of aggressive reporter who eats broken glass for breakfast, and she and Larry collide a lot. But the good guys win in the end. And the book, as I say, is for sale back there, $20 a copy, cash, check, major credit cards, and he said, hopefully, you know, the Christmas shopping season is coming up very, if you're so inclined. Now, what's the plot here? I've told you the general plot, but I know what you all want to know. And is Larry Bob and is Bob Larry? No. I would never abandon journalism. I would never run for Congress or anything else. I ran for the student council in the 8th grade, and I lost. And it was so crushing that I never have run for anything again. But the good news about the book, there's a lot of good news about the book. It's gotten a lot of nice reaction. I think my favorite reaction so far has come from none other than Jamie Raskin, who actually does represent the 8th District of Maryland, right out here in Montgomery. And Jamie, thank you Jamie, bought the book and read the book. I wish he'd given me this ahead of it because I would be on the back cover. He said, I'm just glad I never had to run either against Bob Levey or Larry Felder. I've said, Raskin, for those who don't know him, he's in the wrong business. He's really a late night comedian. The guy has this great sense of humor. One-liner, he's great. I'm glad he liked the book. I think you would like the book. And I'll be back there once I'm done. Jane will sell, I will sign, and our friend Gita, who is looking over Jane's shoulder to understand how the sale works. God help me, I could never do that, because it would involve knowing how to use my phone. We'll be back there. Anyway, folks, I hope this has shed some light on the situation of today's media, the clique worship, the money situation, and how money is flowing to certain kinds of journalism and not to others. I hope you've learned something, and I hope you'll invite me back, and I thank you very much.